On February 12, 1976, Jason Corbett was born in Limerick, Ireland, into a working-class family that, despite financial hardships, shared a strong bond of love and mutual support. From an early age, Jason showed independence, always looking for ways to help his family survive. Raised alongside his twin brother, Wayne, in a modest home, the two brothers faced adversity with a resilient spirit, forged by a home where love prevailed, even when resources were scarce. However, Jason's life was about to be devastated by a tragedy that would forever change the course of his existence. In the early months of 2004, Jason met Maggie, a woman with whom he developed a passionate and deep relationship. The bond between them seemed unbreakable. Marriage followed shortly after, and in September 2004, the joy of their new family grew with the birth of their first child, Jack. Later, in 2006, they were blessed with the arrival of Sarah, a little girl who completed the happiness of their newly formed home. But as promising as Jason and his family's future seemed, an unfortunate tragedy was on the horizon. It was November 2006 when, after Sarah's birth, Maggie suffered an asthma attack. The disease was something she'd dealt with since childhood, and although she was under constant medical care, there were no signs that her condition was this severe. She regularly used an inhaler, but that day, the symptoms worsened alarmingly. The young mother tried in vain to use the device to ease her breathlessness. In a desperate effort, Jason, aware that time was running out, put her in the car and headed for the hospital. But in the middle of the way, tragedy struck. Maggie passed away in the passenger seat, leaving Jason devastated, with two young children and without the woman he loved. The pain was unbearable, but Jason knew he couldn't succumb to grief. He still had Jack and Sarah to care for. The loss of Maggie, though devastating, could not be the end of his story. His friends and family were crucial in this fragile moment, but Jason was never one to easily be shaken. He always had an inner strength that made him move forward even in the darkest times. But, like any grieving father, he knew he couldn't continue alone. The weight of the responsibility of raising two young children without his wife's support led him to a critical decision: to find a nanny. This is how, after an agonizing search for several candidates, Jason came across a young woman named Molly Martins. At 25, Molly was an American from Tennessee, coming from a wealthy family, with a history of emotional struggles and personal challenges that made her a complex and introspective figure. With a past of insecurities, a diagnosed bipolar disorder, and physical issues that affected her development, Molly was seeking a new chance in life, far from her family, and what she considered a dark past. Molly signed up for a website that specialized in recruiting caregivers for families in distress. She seemed like the ideal solution for Jason. Young, beautiful, and seemingly with a sincere willingness to help. But, contrary to what he had imagined, this seemingly simple woman hid a series of secrets and challenges that would soon start to unravel. When Molly arrived in Ireland in early 2008, Jason welcomed her with a mix of anticipation and anxiety, hoping she could fill the void left by Maggie. Molly seemed to fit in well with the family, quickly winning the affection of Jason's children, Jack and Sarah. Her sweet demeanor and the way she bonded with the kids built trust in Jason. However, as the days passed, something began to change. What seemed like a promising start was soon overshadowed by Molly's increasingly erratic behavior. Within a few months, Jason began to notice that she wasn't the person he thought she was. Her behavior became more unpredictable, her moods swung frequently, and she seemed to become more involved in the family dynamic, even in the most intimate aspects of their lives. Jason began to sense that something was wrong. but couldn't pinpoint exactly what was happening. This growing behavior from Molly, coupled with Jason's unresolved grief, began a mounting conflict that eventually led to an irreversible tragedy. The atmosphere in the Corbett household started to shift. What should have been a solution to Jason's pain turned into a spiral of emotional confusion, manipulation, and obsession, with a devastating impact on everyone involved. As time went on, what seemed like a story of rebirth and overcoming challenges was about to become something much darker, enveloped in secrets, lies, and hidden motivations. Jason Corbett's life, which had already been marked by tragedy, was about to be surrounded by even greater mysteries. And as the pieces of this puzzle started to fall into place, a disturbing truth would begin to emerge from the shadows. The relationship between Molly and Jason became increasingly difficult to define. Molly, who initially seemed to be the perfect person to fill the void left by Maggie's death, started to reveal layers of emotional complexity. She was no longer just the dedicated nanny that Jason thought he had found. The young American, coming from a completely different world, was struggling with her own insecurities, unresolved mental health issues, and a diagnosed bipolar disorder, which further complicated her ability to maintain emotional stability. Despite starting with good intentions, the relationship with Jason became more and more tumultuous. At first, she seemed to be a good substitute for the kid's mother, offering love and care, something Jason desperately needed. However, the pressure of replacing Maggie and dealing with her own ghosts from the past wouldn't allow her peace. She began to feel increasingly overwhelmed, seeking control in every area of her life. The attempt to fit into a different reality, far from her family and her country, led Molly to experience a growing sense of loneliness, which directly affected her behavior and mental health. Her erratic behaviors began to affect Jason's children, who were already traumatized by the death of their mother and trying to adjust to the new woman in their lives. Molly, still young and emotionally unstable, didn't know how to handle Jason's children, who were just starting to adapt to the new situation. She constantly found herself frustrated, trying to fill the gap left by Maggie, while at the same time feeling an enormous pressure to be the mother the children needed. She found herself in a role she couldn't properly play, which made her even more anxious. The insecurities she carried started to overflow, creating conflicts with Jason and increasing the tension between them. Jason, in turn, began to realize that, although Molly was a kind and caring person, there was something wrong with her emotional stability. He, who had been a rock for his children until then, found himself increasingly vulnerable. Maggie's death had shattered him, but now he also had to deal with a deteriorating relationship, not knowing how to act or what to do to fix the situation. Though he still had affection for Molly and felt the need to move on, the reality that she wasn't the woman he thought she was crumbled before him. Molly and Jason started to distance emotionally. The relationship, which had once seemed like a promise of healing and new beginnings, was becoming a battlefield. In moments of silence, Jason found himself wondering if he had really invited Molly into his life, or if he was just trying to move on, driven by the need not to be a widowed father anymore. But what affected him the most was Molly's constant dissatisfaction, which seemed to resent her role in the family and her own struggle to fit into this new environment. Molly, in turn, started showing signs that she was no longer happy in Ireland. The loneliness, the internal conflicts, and the pressure from Jason led her to entertain the idea of a fresh start, away from all of it. She began questioning her choices, and over time, one idea began to take over her mind. Moving to the United States would be her only way out for a better life. In her conversations with Jason, she began pressuring him to move to America with the promise of a new beginning. It was a proposal that seemed tempting at first, a chance to change the direction of her life, but that hid a new conflict. For Jason, Ireland was home, where his children were growing up, and where he still carried the memory of his late wife. The kids were already adapting to school and life in the small town, and moving to another country seemed like an absurd idea. He knew that, by following Molly's wishes, he would risk the stability of the children, who had already faced so many losses. The pressure from Molly, however, increased. She felt more and more frustrated, saying that if it wasn't now, she would never have another chance to restart her life. The idea of going back to the United States wasn't just a way to seek a new opportunity, but also a reflection of Molly's desire to take control of her life and the situation with Jason's kids. She didn't want to be seen as just a replacement for their mother. She wanted a permanent role, to belong to that family more solidly. This also included the desire to officially adopt Jack and Sarah, something that, in her mind, would make her an integral part of that home. Jason felt pressured to make a decision, but the alternatives seemed equally destructive. On one hand, he saw the chance for a new beginning, but on the other, the fear that this change would cause more harm than good. He felt genuine love for Molly, but also recognized that their relationship was deteriorating. The inner conflict within him grew every day as he tried to balance his own need to move forward with the responsibility to protect his children and keep their roots in Ireland. The doubts increased. Would the move be the key to solving their problems, or just an escape that would further destabilize his family? The dilemma ate away at him. As the relationship between Molly and Jason became more tense, the emotional wear and tear also affected Molly's behavior. Her growing obsession with fully integrating into the family, combined with the pressure to adopt Jason's children, began to create deeper cracks in the already fragile foundation of the marriage. She was determined to win the adoption, and any obstacle that stood in her way seemed to only strengthen her resolve. Molly's feelings, which until then had seemed like a natural expression of love, began to take on a darker hue. The pressure to adopt the children and gain more control over the situation made her make impulsive decisions. Jason, for his part, found himself increasingly trapped between loyalty to Maggie's memory and the need to protect his children, not just physically, but emotionally. Jason's decision to give in to Molly's request and move to the United States seemed like the only viable solution at that moment. After many discussions, he believed this move could be the fresh start she so desperately wanted, and, at the same time, give his family a chance to overcome the tensions that had settled in. However, instead of relieving the existing problems, the move only exposed new flaws and created even bigger complications. Moving to the United States wasn't a cure-all, but a difficult and painful transition. Molly, who already displayed obsessive and controlling behavior regarding the children's lives, began to show even more discomfort with the changes in her environment. The transition to a new country, with a culture and lifestyle completely different from hers, exacerbated her insecurities and destabilized her mental health even more. What once seemed like an attempt to start over turned into an emotional nightmare for everyone involved. Molly began to feel an overwhelming pressure to adjust to the new reality and, in some way, to fit into Jason's life and that of his children. But her perception of not belonging to this new world only grew. Molly's erratic behavior started affecting the children, who once saw her as a caring and protective figure, someone who loved them and cared for them immeasurably. But over time, Jack and Sarah began to notice changes. The woman who had once seemed like a natural replacement for their mother started showing obvious signs of emotional instability. Molly's mood swings became more apparent, her actions more unpredictable, and the children, still in a vulnerable state, began to feel an increasing sense of insecurity regarding the woman who now occupied the role of mother. Meanwhile, Jason, who was striving to create a stable environment for his children, became increasingly uncomfortable with Molly's behavior. He knew something was wrong, but at the same time, couldn't precisely identify what exactly was happening. His new wife, who had initially seemed to be the right person to help him rebuild his life, was becoming a stranger in his own home. The signs of obsessive control that Molly displayed over Jason's children became more and more evident. She didn't just want to fill the role of mother. She also began to take actions that suggested she was seeking more than that. Her desire to officially adopt Jack and Sarah, to have a stronger legal position within the family, intensified. This desire, initially subtle, began to gain strength and became one of the biggest sources of tension in her relationship with Jason. Molly's behavior was increasingly drifting away from what Jason had imagined to be a new beginning for his family. The weight of dealing with his own internal conflicts, coupled with Molly's demands, was beginning to affect his mental and emotional health. The tension in their relationship began to intensify, and Jason, who had been doing his best to be the pillar of his family, started to feel powerless. His efforts to appease Molly, to find a balance between being the father and husband everyone needed, were becoming increasingly insufficient. Molly, for her part, struggled to hide her emotional turmoil. She felt forced to maintain a facade of normalcy, but as time passed, it became more and more difficult. Friends and family began to notice that something wasn't right. Her behavior, initially disguised by charming charisma and friendliness, started to reveal cracks. Molly wasn't as well as she seemed. She was fighting an emotional whirlwind inside, and others began to notice that her apparent stability was, in fact, a fragile facade about to collapse. Jason began to feel increasingly isolated within his own marriage. The disconnection between him and Molly was palpable, and the pressure of dealing with her emotional instability was beginning to affect his own sanity. The emotional wear and tear turned into a growing conflict, and Jason found himself facing an agonizing choice. He started to consider divorce as a possible solution. The idea of ending the marriage seemed more and more appealing as he watched Molly sink deeper into her own conflicts, unable to deal with the situation in a healthy way. However, the fear of harming the children and the uncertainty about what the future held for them made this decision even harder. At the same time, Molly's motivations started to become more evident. Her desire for control, her obsession with becoming legally recognized as Jack and Sarah's mother, was becoming more and more obvious. She wasn't just trying to adjust to Jason's life. She wanted a position of authority and control, something beyond just being a nanny or wife. This desire, fueled by her own insecurities and emotional distortions, began to create an irreparable rift between them. With tensions escalating, the family dynamic quickly deteriorated. Jason, despite his attempts to stay calm, saw his family life consumed by Molly's obsession and her growing emotional instability. Their relationship was turning into a minefield, where at any moment an explosion of conflicts could occur. And like a storm about to break, the signs that things were about to reach a point of no return began to intensify. The final stage of this conflict wouldn't be a simple dispute between husband and wife, but a battle for power and control that would affect not only Jason and Molly's marriage, but also the lives of the children, who had already faced so much to carry another burden of trauma. What seemed like a search for a new beginning had turned into a fight for the emotional survival of everyone involved. And as Jason found himself more and more trapped in this whirlwind, the only thing he knew for sure was that the solution seemed to be beyond his reach. The tragedy that would culminate in Jason Corbett's death occurred on the night of August 2nd, 2015, following a violent argument on Jack's birthday, Jason's oldest son. The tension had been building for months. Jason and Molly's relationship was Already in tatters, arguments were frequent, and Molly's emotional instability made any conflict an imminent possibility. That night, the dispute intensified and quickly escalated into a violent situation. Molly and her father, Tom, claimed that they were acting in self-defense. According to them, Jason had tried to suffocate Molly during one of the increasingly frequent and intense arguments. The claim that they were only trying to protect their daughter from a domestic violence attack was quickly spread by Molly and Tom, but the crime scene was not as simple as they seemed. When the police arrived at the scene, the sight was horrific. Jason Corbett was dead, the victim of a brutal attack. His body was found with clear signs of premeditated homicide, with blows to the head and other obvious injuries, indicating that there had been no proportional struggle or immediate defense. It wasn't the scene of a victim fighting for their life. What followed was a complex investigation that exposed the claims of self-defense. Inconsistencies in Molly and Tom's statements began to emerge quickly, especially regarding the location and manner in which the crime was committed. The claim that Jason's death was a direct result of an attempted suffocation seemed unlikely, as his body showed no signs of strangulation that would typically accompany such episodes. As the case details were analyzed, the police discovered that Molly's behavior, combined with emotional and psychological issues, was a critical factor that contributed to the tragic outcome. Her untreated bipolar disorder and her growing obsession with controlling Jason's life, and the children created an environment conducive to violence. The fear of losing custody of Jason's children, combined with increasing tension and disagreements with her husband, culminated in an act of desperation and rage. Molly, feeling increasingly threatened by her perception that she was losing control, made a fateful decision that night. She and her father, Tom, would carry out a plan that would prove lethal. Subsequent investigations revealed that the situation had gone far beyond a simple accident or an isolated case of self-defense. Authorities discovered that months before the crime, Molly had already shown aggressive and controlling behaviors toward Jason, fueled by an obsession to officially adopt his children and have a permanent role in their lives. The pressure on Jason to grant her the legal rights to adopt Jack and Sarah, combined with her erratic and unstable behavior, was the spark that ignited the tragedy. Molly and Tom's trial dragged on for years, with numerous legal twists and turns. The case became a legal labyrinth, with the defense unsuccessfully trying to reinforce the idea of self-defense. However, the evidence was relentless. The prosecution presented compelling proof that Jason was not the victim of a spontaneous assault, but rather a deliberate attack carried out by people who knew exactly what they were doing. The fact that Jason was found with clear signs of violence indicating an intense struggle, but without any sign of defense on his part, suggested that he was caught completely by surprise. Ultimately, after years of legal battles, both Molly and Tom were convicted of homicide, with the prosecution successfully proving that the crime was premeditated. The court recognized that the family tensions and Molly's internal conflicts had led her into an emotional spiral that culminated in an unimaginable act of violence. Molly was held responsible, not only for Jason's death, but also for the destruction of an entire family. Tom, although in a secondary role, was also considered an accomplice in the execution of the crime. The resolution of the case, however, was neither simple nor satisfactory. Although justice was served in legal terms, the impact of the tragedy was deep and irreversible. The trial was appealed several times, and after various twists, it was reconsidered. However, the damage had already been done. What seemed like an attempt at a new beginning, an escape to a new life, turned into a nightmare of lies, obsession, and destruction. Jason's children, Jack and Sarah, were taken in by Jason's family in Ireland, being separated from Molly, who had become an increasingly toxic figure in their lives. The suffering of the children, who had already lost their mother and now had to deal with the death of their father, and the reality that the woman they had called mother was not who she seemed, was devastating. Despite the conviction and the self-defense claims from Molly and Tom, what remained was a story marked by tragedy and unresolved mystery. The true reason behind Jason Corbett's death, the real dynamics of his marriage, and the true nature of Molly's motivations were never fully clear. At the heart of it all, the case left a shadow of uncertainty. Molly never fully revealed what was on her mind, what truly led her to make such a drastic decision. Her obsession with control and need to be recognized as a mother, combined with deep emotional instability, contributed to a scenario where the line between love, obsession, and violence became practically indistinguishable. And so, the story of Jason Corbett closed in a tragic way, a reminder of how secrets, obsessions, and unresolved emotions can lead to catastrophic outcomes, leaving those involved and everyone around them with unanswered questions. Jason Corbett's case, a story of distorted love and tragedy, continues to haunt those who know the truth but still wonder how far lies and obsessions can go before the line between love and horror is crossed.